Welcome back to the Irregular Pioneer channel. I'm your host, Matt, and thank you for joining me for another episode. I'm here with a special guest, Puro Dominicana. You might be asking yourself, Matt, why do you have a cigar? What's the festive occasion? Why are you going to light up? Today's my birthday, and I plan to enjoy it. It's going to be the first birthday I celebrate since I think I was 11 years old, the last time I celebrated a birthday. And since I'm free, you best believe I'm going to lean in and enjoy it. But since we're on the topic of birthdays, let's talk about why Jehovah's Witnesses don't celebrate birthdays. Now, if you were one of Jehovah's Witnesses, or if you are one of Jehovah's Witnesses, you know the stock answer. Well, listen, there were only 2 birthdays in the Bible. Both of them were for wicked men, and at both of those birthday parties, someone was murdered. And, of course, birthdays are of pagan origin. That's the Jehovah's Witness answer. You know it. You're going to hear it every time you ask a Jehovah's Witness about birthdays. But what I'd like to do is consider those reasons and a couple more that Jehovah's Witnesses provide for why birthdays shouldn't be celebrated, and see if they really stand up to basic, reasonable logic, and logic that they've also used for other topics. So, what we're going to do is consider from jw.org the frequently asked question, why don't Jehovah's Witnesses celebrate birthdays? And as much as I hate giving their website traffic, I think it's very important to take a look at their own website to see exactly what they say and reference other things that they say from other articles that really clash and show that there are some gaps in logic when it comes to this idea of birthdays not being celebrated. But before we get into the frequently asked questions article, I'd like to read to you what the Insight book has to say about Jehovah's Witnesses and birthdays. Now, if you don't know what the Insight book is the encyclopedia for Jehovah's Witnesses. It contains information for pretty much any topic in alphabetical order. Now, under birthday, on page 319, this is what Insight on the Scriptures has to say. The Bible makes direct reference to only 2 birthday celebrations, those of Pharaoh of Egypt and Herod Antipas. These 2 accounts are similar in that both occasions were marked with great feasting and granting of favors. Both are remembered for executions: the beheading of Pharaoh's chief baker in the first instance, the beheading of John the Baptizer in the latter. So again, this is the main reason that Jehovah's Witnesses will tell you that birthdays should not be celebrated. But now let's get into the frequently asked questions page from jw.org. Now, there are 4 main points that Jehovah's Witnesses give, and the first of which is birthday celebrations have pagan roots. And according to this standard dictionary of folklore, mythology, and legend that they quote, it says evil spirits and influences have the opportunity to attack the celebrants, and that the presence of friends and the expression of good wishes help to protect the celebrant. Now, that was the belief in ancient times, and that is why birthdays were celebrated, according to this dictionary. Now, let's assume that this dictionary is 100% correct, and that all scholars and historians agree with that point of view. Well, there's an issue here. If you're going to say that birthdays shouldn't be celebrated because they have pagan roots, then nothing pagan should be celebrated or continued in any kind of tradition. And if that's the case, there are some things that Jehovah's Witnesses do that are very pagan. You want a few examples? Okay. You ever been to a wedding, a Jehovah's Witness wedding? What do they normally have? A wedding cake. You know what a wedding cake is? Of pagan origin. Or what about these things? Wedding rings. Oh yeah, of pagan origin. Or, okay, let's say we're not talking about weddings. What about funerals? Have you ever been to a Jehovah's Witness funeral where they lay flowers on the grave? I have. Oh yeah, that's of pagan origin too. The point is, you can't just look at anything that has pagan roots and say, oh, well, we shouldn't do that because it comes from something pagan. Because if that's the case, there are a lot of things in your everyday life that you wouldn't even realize have pagan roots. Here's another thing. Jehovah's Witnesses have said in numerous articles that just because something has pagan roots doesn't mean we need to overly focus on it. So why don't they use that same ruling when it comes to birthdays? I'll give you an example. From a 2003 Awake, here's what Jehovah's Witnesses had to say about piñatas. It says, a main concern is not what the practice meant hundreds of years ago, but how it is viewed today in your area. Understandably, opinions may vary from one place to another. Hence, it is wise to avoid turning such matters into big issues. Now, if you don't know what a piñata is, it is usually some kind of shape of an animal that is filled with candy. It's, made out of like paper or cardboard or whatever, and it's usually at children's parties, and the children hit the piñata with a stick or a bat or something until the piñata busts open and all the candy falls out, and the children go and rush over for the candy. Now, obviously, piñatas do not have a Christian origin, but here in the 2003 Awake, September 22nd, Jehovah's Witnesses were saying, hey, listen, the concern is not what the practice meant hundreds of years ago, but how it is viewed today. Hence, it is wise to avoid turning such matters into big issues. Let me ask you a question. According to what Jehovah's Witnesses had to say on their frequently asked questions page, that birthday celebrations came from people believing that evil spirits and influences used the birthday as an opportunity to attack the celebrants, and the friend's expression of good wishes protected the celebrant. Does anybody celebrate their birthday for that reason? No. So why is it we're so worried about the origin of birthdays when it comes to that, but not piñatas or wedding cakes or wedding rings? Not consistent, Jehovah's Witnesses. Here's another thing. Jehovah's Witnesses love, as we pointed out, that they love to point out that there were 2 murders at these birthday celebrations in the Bible. Which is true. That cannot be argued. It is absolutely true, according to the Bible, that 2 people were killed at these birthday celebrations for wicked men. But, if 2 people were hit by cars, and you knew nothing about cars, only that 2 people were hit by cars, does that mean no one else should ever drive a car again? You tell me how many people have been killed at birthday parties. How many people do you know have had a birthday party where they say, hey, it's my birthday, doing it up, gotta kill somebody? That doesn't happen. So because a 1,000-year-old book only had 2 examples of something, and both of those examples were bad, that means we should never do it? What? A lot of people have mentioned this point. A lot of people. You will see other ex-JW YouTubers who mention this point when we talk about birthdays. The Bible always mentions dogs in a negative manner. Always. Is it wrong to have a dog? How many Jehovah's Witnesses do you know that have dogs? Again, be consistent, Jehovah's Witnesses. So let's look at number 2. The early Christians did not celebrate birthdays. The World Book Encyclopedia says that they considered the celebration of anyone's birth to be a pagan custom. Now, again, the thing with the pagan stuff. Just because something is pagan doesn't mean it's a terrible thing, or it doesn't mean it's something that Jehovah's Witnesses aren't already doing. I'll give you another example. There's a lot of historians that believe that worship at churches or any kind of place of worship on Sunday come from pagan roots. Very literally meaning the sun day, worshiping the sun on that day. And there are a lot of people that believe that is why Sunday is the primary day of worship for so many people, especially in Christianity. What's the primary day for weekend meetings for Jehovah's Witnesses? Sunday. Now, I know there are Saturday meetings and, other meetings during the week, but the vast majority of Jehovah's Witnesses around the world have their weekend meeting on Sunday. So, according to some historians, that's pagan too. So, the whole "it's pagan" isn't really a good excuse. Here's a third example Jehovah's Witnesses use for why they shouldn't celebrate birthdays. The only commemoration that Christians are required to keep involves not a birth, but a death, that of Jesus. I mean, that is such a weak excuse. And they use Ecclesiastes chapter 7 and verse 1 that says the day of death is better than the day of birth. But that's totally out of context because it wasn't talking about celebrations of birth. And yes, according to the Bible, making a name with God, the day of someone's death is more important than the day of someone's birth. Okay, makes sense. But again, that's using scriptures out of context because Ecclesiastes wasn't talking about celebrating birthdays. So yes, how you live your life is much more important than the day of your birth and celebrating the day of your birth. Of course, and any reasonable person would agree with that. But that doesn't mean that celebrating the day of your birth is a bad thing. But anyway, let's continue to point number 4. According to jw.org, the Bible never refers to a servant of God celebrating a birthday. It also says this is not simply an oversight, for it does record 2 birthday celebrations by those not serving God. However, both of those events are presented in a bad light. Again, this is a super weak excuse. All right, so it didn't mention anyone celebrating birthdays. As I mentioned in my last video, and I got a little pushback for it, some people were mad at me, but the Bible doesn't specifically mention child abuse to be a terrible thing. But if you believe in God as the Bible speaks about God, would you think that God approves of child abuse? Of course not. So just because the Bible doesn't specifically mention something doesn't mean that, it's a terrible thing. And, I would really encourage Jehovah's Witnesses to follow some Bible principle. What I mean, 1 Corinthians chapter 4 and verse 6. If you've ever been an elder, if you've ever been a ministerial servant, I guarantee you've heard this scripture used in counsel numerous times. 1 Corinthians chapter 4 and verse 6. Now, brothers, these things I have applied to myself and Apollos for your good, that through us you may learn the rule, do not go beyond the things that are written. Jehovah's Witnesses are just making up some stuff when it comes to this whole don't celebrate birthdays. They're just making up their own interpretation of the Bible, and they're telling you how you should feel about birthdays. But they're not giving you any real solid basis to believe that you shouldn't celebrate birthdays. They're just saying there were 2 bad birthdays in the Bible, therefore you shouldn't celebrate them. And again, I ask the question, since dogs were always mentioned negatively in the Bible, should you not have a dog? Guys, let's use some basic reasoning here and some, just basic common sense. There's nothing wrong with celebrating birthdays. Even when I was one of Jehovah's Witnesses fully believing, I thought it was a stretch. And now, I just don't care anymore. I'm going to celebrate my birthday. I'm going to have a good time doing it. Everyone, I hope you take care. Be well. I'm going to be well because it's my birthday.